The scripture this morning is from Luke 15, verses 1 through 3, 11b through 32. You know, I thought all these long readings were to be saved for Chuck. But, now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him, and the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the wealth that will belong to me." So he divided his assets between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant region, and there he squandered his wealth in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that region, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that region, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger, and I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is now found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat, so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your assets with prostitutes, who killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He has been lost and has been found.'" For these sacred words.
Week of our sermon series on Gandhi's 7 social sins. And we've been kind of wedding those social sins with different passages that are taken during the Lenten season. So we're in Lent as well. And so today, let's say we've already covered politics without principle. We solved that problem, right? Knowledge without character, science without humanity. And today's topic. Before I get to today's topic. So as you know, a couple of months ago, I was able to go back and visit my parents for a couple of weeks in Alabama. They've had a series of health challenges, so it was good to go and spend some time with them and just kind of be. It was kind of fun. Most of the 2 weeks was spent in the den with my father. We each had our own recliner, so all was well. And we watched a lot of sports, and we had a lot of good talks. My father is 83. He has gone virtually blind from complications from glaucoma. Just as his mother, my Meemaw Tucker, who I've told you about, she was blind for the last 30 years of her life from complications with glaucoma, and now my father is virtually there as well. He is a Baptist music director in a Baptist church. and has been my entire life. I've spent my whole life watching him direct choir. And in the Baptist churches, the music director also directs the congregation. And so I've heard him, and he's still doing it. He's done it in bunches of churches. He's retired 4 times, but he's still doing it. And fortunately, he's done it so long that he has all the hymns memorized. He knows what number they are, and he knows which verses to sing, and so he doesn't have to see to do something that he loves. What's interesting is that after a life of being too nervous to sing solos, he suddenly is singing solos all the time. And I think it's because he can't see the people. And so he's not nervous in front of the crowd because he doesn't see the crowd. But anyway, it's sweet to see him doing something that he loves. I've heard him sing so many hymns, direct so many hymns over the years. Amazing Grace, I probably heard him 200 times. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, who saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. Now, music directing was his side gig. His main gig was as a certified public accountant. He was a CPA for many years. He did my taxes. He taught me how to do my taxes. He taught me how clergy taxes operate, which are tricky. They're their own kind of special animal, clergy taxes. And so he's somebody who loves numbers. And he loves talking about numbers. And some of the numbers he likes to talk about are medical-related numbers. He's been a diabetic for 30 years, and so he's always tracking his glucose. And so he's always ready to tell me about that when I talk to him. And if I call him on a day where he's gotten back lab results, it's going to be a long conversation. And I laugh at that, but I realize that that's becoming more and more true of me as I get older. Someone today has already asked me about my knee. And I got tennis elbow, and I haven't played tennis in 30 years. But anyway, so the medical stuff I'm starting to understand. But he loves going over those numbers. And I'm sitting there with him in the den, and he wants to start talking about these medical numbers. And he says, John, when's the last time you had your lab work done? And I was like, well, it's been a while. It's been back before we moved to Langley, when we were in Core Valley. He said, well, can you pull them up? And I said, well, yes. So I got on the My Chart on my phone. I pulled up my labs. And Dad's got it all memorized. And he starts going down the list, you know. What's your albumin? I have to tell him what my albumin is. What's your phosphate? And he says, what's your bun? Now, I think it's BUN. I think it's blood, what is it, blood nitrate? Something? There you go. Well, he just said bun. How's your bun? So I told him what the bun is. What's your creatinine and your hematocrit? So we're going through all these numbers because he loves the numbers. And so we got sports on, we're talking these numbers, and then there's a lull in the conversation. And then he switches track. And he says, John, since you're here, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what's going to happen when Mom and I pass away. I want to talk about inheritance for you and your younger brother, Tim, so that y'all can know what to expect. And so we had this very moving conversation about my brother and me, about the lives that we're living, the needs that we have, the challenges that we face. I talked about how we live so far away, how my brother is there close by, and my brother does a lot more for them than I do. And so Dad just wants to be fair. You know, he wants to be fair-minded. And so he tells me about his plan for inheritance when they pass away. And it's a sweet conversation. And so I leave and I come back here knowing, having a better sense of what's going to happen in the future regarding inheritance when my parents die. Now I think about that because inheritance plays a big role in this parable that we've all heard so many times we know it by heart. The parable of the prodigal son. The better name would be the parable of the man with 2 sons, or the father with 2 sons, because it's actually more about him and the whole collection than it is about just the prodigal. But what's happening in this story is the youngest son has gone to his father and said, I want my share of the inheritance now. I don't want to wait for you to die. I want it now so I can go off and live the life that I want to live right now. And that is what the father does. Can you imagine the effrontery, the offense, the rudeness, the disrespect? I mean, if my father had had that conversation with me in the den, And when he was done, I turned to him and said, "You know, Dad, I'll take it right now. I don't want to wait for you and Mom to die. I'd like it right now." Can you imagine? And yet that's what this younger son does in this passage. He wants his inheritance. And he goes off and he squanders it in riotous living. Now I'm also thinking about inheritance because Gandhi, that person that we like so much, that we admire so much, the social sin for today is wealth without work. And Gandhi did not believe in inheritance. Did not believe that wealth should be privately accumulated and passed down to the next generation. Because for that generation, it's wealth without work. Now, if you go online and you start looking up wealth without work, Gandhi, you'll come across a lot of different articles from a lot of different perspectives. And some of them you click on and they want you to know right off the bat that Gandhi was not talking about inheritance. And he wasn't talking about passive income. But then if you go actually look at Gandhi and read Gandhi, yeah, he was talking about inheritance for sure. He was definitely talking about inheritance. Now, was he talking about passive income, playing the stock market? That's a little harder to know. He certainly was against gambling, the lottery, all that kind of stuff. He certainly sided with workers, believed in unions and worker strikes and participated in them. Certainly bemoaned the growing gap between the wealthy and the poor. So he had a lot of feelings that we would all agree with, but he also had some thoughts that might make us a little uncomfortable. So when you hear me talking about inheritance and you hear me talking about passive income and how maybe they're part of the sin, if you start getting a little rumble in your stomach and if you start getting little rationalizations going on in your head about how there's nothing wrong with those things, then join me. I feel the same way. I want my inheritance and I've got some passive income. But what we all need to admit right up front is that any irritation or indignation or rationalization that we have when it comes to this is because we are born with money already having its claws in us. We are born into a culture of predatory capitalism that requires us to play the game. And if we don't play the game, we are punished for it. We are born into that. It is there before we came along. It is there waiting for us at our birth, and we are forced to play along with it. A good image for this is, I knew this a few years ago, and I've reconfirmed it this past week. Multiple laboratories around the country, on multiple different times, have learned that between 85 and 90% of all $1 bills in circulation in this country today contain slight traces of cocaine. So if you have a $1 bill on you, there's a high probability that it has traces of cocaine on it. Money is dirty. You should wash your hands before you count it and after you count it. Money is dirty physically, hygienically, and there's probably something true about it as well morally. We are forced to participate in this game that we have inherited. There's that word again, inherited. Now, theology has a name for inherited systems of sin. And the name for it in theology is, brace yourselves, original sin. Not something we talk a lot about in progressive churches. Now, Gandhi was a lawyer, and I went to law school, and that's almost the only thing we have in common. Although I'm losing my hair too. So, when I was in law school, I learned some interesting things about crime. And I learned how some of our ideas about crime are actually rooted in older ideas that come from theology about sin. And so I learned in criminal law that there are three elements to a crime that a prosecutor has to prove. And the defense, all they have to do is poke a hole in one of those three elements to establish reasonable doubt. And here are the three elements of a crime that must be proven by the prosecutor. The first is called the mens rea, or the guilty mind. You've got to mean to do it. I want to do this terrible thing. I mean to do it. I'm planning to do it. I'm doing it on purpose. And that matters because we don't like to punish people for doing something accidentally. Right? That seems fair. No, let's not punish people for doing something accidentally. So you have to have the bad mind. Number two, you have to do the actual act. You can't just have a bad thought. We've all got bad thoughts. Good thing we can't be arrested for that yet. But bad thoughts without bad action, no crime. If you have the bad thought, you turn it into an action, now you've satisfied two of the elements. Thirdly is causation. The act that you do has to cause the harm you intended. And if that doesn't happen, you don't have a crime. And my law professor, who must have grown up in the 1920s, told us this example. He said, look, if you look out and your neighbor on the windowsill has 4 pies sitting on the windowsill, and you think to yourself, I'm going to steal one of those pies, then you've got the guilty mind. And then you sneak over there and you grab a pie and you bring it back to your house. And now you've got the guilty act. You've got the mind and the act. But if it turns out that the neighbor put those pies up there for her neighbors to take, you don't have a crime. Because there's no causation, there's no harm. And so I thought, oh, that's very interesting to know. And then we learned that there are some exceptions to this. And those exceptions are called strict liability or public welfare offenses. And these are offenses or crimes that are deemed so important for public welfare that we don't care if you meant to do it or not. Theoretically, this could apply to a nuclear power plant that has a leak or something like that where they don't mean for it to happen, but it causes all kinds of harm. Criminal charges could be brought. On a local level, speeding tickets. If you get caught doing 45 and a 30, and the officer pulls you over and says, you're doing 45 and a 30, and you say, I didn't know it was 30, I thought it was a 45, you still get the ticket. Because we don't care if your mind had the guilt or not. So what that reminded me of is, now wait a second, so if there are offenses that don't require our knowing participation in, then that reminds me a lot about original sin. Because original sin, when you get rid of a bunch of the junk, and there is a lot of junk, I'll name the junk, okay? Adam and Eve sinned, therefore damaged our will. We're all broken. We all have broken wills. And it's passed down through procreation, and we're just horrible, and we're deserving of punishment. All that stuff, okay, get rid of all that. I agree, that's junk. Let's not talk about that. But there is something in that that is more profound that we should hang on to, which is this. Sometimes we participate in a sin that we inherited rather than a sin that we committed. And the inherited sins that we talk a lot about these days are sins like systemic racism, predatory capitalism, misogynistic patriarchy, homophobia. We're all born into this. We are living in this and breathing this in before we have a chance to even be moral agents. And so, what do we do with that knowledge? Because people don't like original sin, and I get it, because original sin kind of means punishment without guilt. And if you think about it, punishment without guilt is similar to wealth without work, because it means result without action. Result without action. So then I think about this. What if we flip it? And instead of punishment without guilt, we turn it into reward without offense. Reward without offense. Reward without effort. Reward without effort. And now let's go back to this parable. When we read the parable, we are supposed to identify with the older son. And we know this because in Luke, Jesus is telling the parable to the scribes and the Pharisees who are mad because Jesus is eating with tax collectors and sinners. So in response, Jesus tells this parable, and where the righteous older son is like the scribes and the Pharisees, who's mad because Jesus is eating with the tax collectors and the sinners, and the father has welcomed back the prodigal. And when I preach this sermon, when I preach this parable, I always try to make sure that the congregation identifies with the older son. I identify with the older son. We are here largely because we are trying to do the right thing. We are trying to confront the evils and sins that we've been born into. We take a position on this. We are a reconciling congregation. We care about justice. We are trying to address the sins we've inherited. And so I want us to own the fact that we're like older sons. We're trying our best to do the right thing, just like he did. He stayed home, he worked, he did everything he was supposed to do. But what happens is when people read this parable or they hear this parable, they almost always identify with the prodigal son. They almost never identify with the older son. So the parable is working against itself. And we identify with the younger son, I think, because most of us know we've gotten a lot more good and blessing out of life than we deserve. And most of us know that we fall short and fail in many, many ways. And so we identify with the prodigal. But I think we're not supposed to identify with either son. I think we're supposed to identify with the father. Because think about this. Let's go back to that phrase. I reinterpreted wealth without work into reward without effort. Reward without effort is a sin. From the older son's perspective, it is a sin to reward the younger son because the younger son did nothing right, and that's not fair. And let's admit that it isn't fair. It is not fair to the older son. He never got to have a calf and a party with his friends. That's not fair. The father in the story knows that it isn't fair and goes out to his older son to welcome him also. So reward without effort is a sin. But reward without effort is also, this is what's amazing to me, reward without effort is also a definition of grace. So how can it be both a sin and grace? Reward without effort is grace. When we all recognize that, like the prodigal, we have failed, we have fallen short, we have not been the people we've been called to be. We are participating in ongoing injustices that we inherited. And we are grateful that God loves us unconditionally and accepts us anyway. That's the power of grace. Reward without effort is grace. Reward without effort is sin. The Father can hold both of these things together at the same time. The father can look at the older son, recognize that that son has not been treated fairly because he did the work. He earned the wealth. He made the effort. He earned the reward. It's not fair. The father can know that and love that son. At the same time, the father can love the prodigal that has returned. Because love, what is love other than reward without effort? I mean, that's love. That's grace. So it's both of those things at the same time. And to me, that's how I make sense of this parable. As we all try to wrestle with wealth without work, what it might mean, what it could mean, our role in it, all that we've inherited about it, all that we have to make decisions within it, all that stuff is complicated. And we're doing the very best we can, I honestly believe. But that's what I think. I think we need to identify with the Father and hold all this together instead of choosing one of the sons. I think back to the hymn, Amazing Grace, that I've heard my father sing 100 times. Written by John Newton, lived from 1725 to 1807, was a participant in the slave trade. Now, you talk about inherited injustice that he participated in. And then later in life, after a series of conversions, became a minister. John Wesley knew him. He was influenced by Charles Wesley's hymns. He became an abolitionist. And it is he that wrote Amazing Grace. And in Amazing Grace, that first verse, he refers to this parable. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And here's the line from the parable. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Sin and grace. Hopefully we can see them together. Amen.